I'm Lisa Morgan, a 32-year-old woman who has always been Rebecca's responsible elder sister. As we grew up, we were inseparable, exchanging secrets and dreams. I was overjoyed to be her maid of honor when she got engaged. Planning her ideal day took me many hours, thousands of dollars, and all of my emotions. However, family dynamics are complex, particularly when my mother, Deborah, is in charge. I never thought she would utter those heartbreaking words to me while seeing me in the eyes. This story might just give you the strength you need, so please leave a comment below, hit like, and subscribe if you're viewing from somewhere struggling with family problems. As Rebecca's older sister growing up, I frequently assumed the role of protector and mentor. I was the reliable person in her life, helping her deal with everything from tying her shoes to navigating the drama of high school. Deborah, our mother, never concealed her partiality. I was the sensible one who needed to loosen up, but Rebecca was the golden child with her creative abilities and vivacious attitude. My father, Thomas, lived on the fringe of our family's dynamics, preferring harmony to conflict. If my mother's actions went too far, I naturally became the family's issue solution because I was the responsible oldest child. I made arrangements for repairs when the roof started to leak. I discreetly used my money to make up the difference when my costs mounted. This trend persisted into our adult years, with me providing Rebecca with financial support while she pursued her degree in art history. In the event that our parents' donations were insufficient, I became a financial consultant for a prominent Boston firm after following my own route. I was aware of the irony that, although managing client portfolios worth millions of dollars, I was still required to oversee my family's finances. However, I didn't mind. I was genuinely happy to help Rebecca realize her ambitions. 3 years ago, Rebecca and James Wilson met at an art gallery opening, and I knew right away that they were meant to be. Despite coming from an affluent family, James didn't flaunt it. He encouraged Rebecca's professional goals and appreciated her artistic viewpoint. Nobody was astonished when they got engaged after 2 years of dating. Additionally, Rebecca phoned me first, yelling excitedly over the phone. He suggested, "Lisa, I take it that you will be my maid of honor? Without you, I couldn't do this." Happiness poured up in her voice that December morning. "Of course, Will, like I promised." And I'm already imagining how I can assist her realize her wedding goals. The early phases of planning were just how I had envisioned. On the weekends, Rebecca and I looked at potential locations, talked on color schemes, and made inspiration-filled Pinterest boards. I made sure her goal became a reality by taking thorough notes during every conversation. Fabric swatches and bridal publications gradually took over my flat. During what should have been a typical family dinner to talk about wedding costs, the first indication of problems appeared. I had never seen a leather-bound wedding planner before Mom brought it to me. Before everybody had even finished their salad, she declared, "I've already made deposits at the Clayton Hotel." I took advantage of the one date they had open this summer. Rebecca appeared astonished, but happy. "That's very kind of you, Mom." However, Lisa and I continued to compare locations. "The Clayton reservations are made a year in advance, darling." Fortunately for us, they had to cancel. Mom gave me a victorious look and patted Rebecca's hand. In addition, "I've always thought of your wedding taking place there." The first of many judgments taken without consultation was that one. Mom practically took over in a matter of weeks, going from being an occasional participant to dictating the wedding. Her friends' suggestions were taken into consideration over the vendors I had investigated. Suddenly, the color scheme that Rebecca and I had decided on was too muted. Rebecca reassured me, "It's fine when I voice my worries. This is a lot of fun for Mom, and it simplifies planning." In addition, she and her father make significant financial contributions. I took a step back and bit my tongue. I'm still lending a hand when I can, but I'm starting to feel like an outsider. When my cousin Megan began to show up in planning pictures on social media, that emotion became more intense. Megan had consistently followed our family gatherings, showing a special interest in joining the inner circle. She was now unexpectedly going to vendor meetings that I hadn't been invited to with Rebecca and my mother. She was holding color swatches against bridesmaid dress options in one Instagram picture, which I assumed would be my honor. One evening, while looking through yet another picture of them during a cake tasting, I casually told my partner Tyler, "Rebecca seems closer to Megan these days." Tyler, who is always the voice of reason, proposed, "Maybe it's just because Megan has more free time. "You've been slammed at work this quarter." I nodded, ignoring the persistent fear that something more important was taking place. After all, for 30 years, Rebecca and I had been there for one another. That couldn't be altered by a few weeks of wedding preparation, could it? However, the invites to organizing parties completely ceased coming as spring wore on. Rebecca's answers were more hurried and ambiguous as I contacted her to check in. The lengthy conversations over musical selections and centerpieces were swapped out for brief texts. "Mom has already worked it out or is managing it." In the meantime, I continued to contribute financially to several aspects of the wedding, including the deposit for Rebecca's favorite photographer, whom my mother felt was too costly, putting together what I imagined would be the ideal wedding, present a lavish vacation to Bali, and ordering personalized welcome baskets for guests traveling from out of town, including an own villa with views of the ocean and first-class flights. After the wedding, I promised myself everything would be back to normal. It was only a hectic period, and soon after, my sister and I would chuckle over wine in Mom's newlywed flat about her wedding. At the time, I had no idea how mistaken I was or how rapidly things would get worse than I ever imagined. It hit me hard the day I found out I wasn't invited to Rebecca's wedding dress shopping. My co-worker Natalie, who was acquainted with the owner of the store, asked me an innocent inquiry, and that's how I found out. "How went yesterday's appointment with Rebecca?" "Sandra said that your sister immediately found the one." My coffee cup was halfway to my lips when I froze. "Which appointment?" Natalie's face changed from one of excitement to uneasiness. "Oh, in moments of elegance. Sandra claimed that your mother's sister and cousin spent hours there sipping champagne. I simply thought you were present as well." I said something about a last-minute work issue and fled to the loo, where I gazed at my reflection and attempted to understand why I had been left out of such a significant occasion. Since we were teenagers, pretending pillowcases were veils and promising to be there for each other's important moments, Rebecca and I had discussed wedding dress shopping. That evening, I carefully controlled my voice as I called Rebecca. "How was the dress buying experience?" A pause. "Oh, everything happened so quickly. Mom had an appointment, and it was only meant to be a quick glance with Megan rather than the entire shopping day." One more pause. "We needed a third opinion, and she was free." I said quietly that I could have set myself free. "You had the option to inquire." "Don't worry about this, Lisa. You can participate in a lot of different wedding-related activities." However, the other wedding-related items never came to pass. Although I was requested to provide financial support for the venue, I had no say in how the bridal shower was planned. Megan took charge of organizing the bachelorette party and picked a location that I knew Rebecca wouldn't actually like. After 30 years of knowing my sister, I made some recommendations, but they were rejected because they weren't what Rebecca wanted anymore. I nevertheless kept providing support from the shadows. I spent $8,600 on first-class airfare, opulent lodging, and unique experiences that I knew the couple would adore as I completed the honeymoon plans. I visualized Rebecca's reaction when I gave her the surprise at the rehearsal dinner, the embrace, and the reestablishment of our sisterly relationship. In the meantime, we became more apart. Rebecca started turning down our customary Sunday brunches, but she always had a different reason. Our interactions felt forced and superficial when we did talk, not at all like the in-depth discussions we had normally had. "Are things going well between us?" After 3 weeks of progressively less frequent communication, I eventually inquired bluntly. "It's all right," she said, not quite looking me in the eyes. "I'm just really busy with wedding stuff. Mom has done a fantastic job managing everything." 2 months before to the wedding, in May, I overheard a talk at a family get-together that chilled me to the bone. I heard my call coming from the next dining room as I entered the kitchen to refill my water glass. "Lisa has always been challenging," my mother said emphatically. "It's slowly dawning on Rebecca. She must always be in charge and make everything about her achievements." Megan replied in a tone brimming with phony sympathy that it must be difficult for Rebecca, particularly at her wedding when she ought to be the focus of attention. "That's right. We have had to reduce her involvement because of this." As their words took hold, I stood motionless, my glass filled with water, all for Rebecca's sake. My own mother was deliberately trying to keep me out of my sister's wedding by portraying me to anyone who would listen as an attention-seeking monster. I finally opened up to Tyler that evening, sharing the anxieties I had been holding inside. For months. What if they decide I'm no longer welcome at the wedding? What if the result of all this distance is worse? Tyler's solid presence contrasted with my trembling palms as he drew me in. That isn't feasible. As Rebecca's sister, all you've done is encourage her. What if, however, her mother has persuaded her otherwise? You have no idea how convincing she is or how she manipulates situations. Then you must speak with Rebecca face to face, Tyler stated firmly. Stop speculating and assuming that things will improve themselves. You need to talk honestly about what's going on. He was correct. Passive acceptance was not an option since the situation had gotten too bad. The next morning, I sent Rebecca a text. We must discuss our relationship and the wedding. Are we able to meet tomorrow? Hours later, she responded, quite busy with wedding-related tasks. On Thursday at 7 o'clock, visit your parents' house. Then we can speak. Those were some of the longest 5 days of my life. I practiced my words and how I would politely and accusation-free communicate my hurt. I reminded myself that our mother's strong personality might put strain on Rebecca, who might be stuck in the midst. I was filled with optimism for understanding and reconciliation when I arrived at our parents' place on Thursday night. I was unaware that I was entering a trap that would destroy my bond with my family and make me reevaluate what true devotion and self-respect meant. When I parked outside my parents' colonial-style house that Thursday evening, the air felt strangely still. It felt strange to be back in the driveway where Rebecca and I used to play hopscotch as children. Before making my way to the front door, I fixed my blouse, took a deep breath, and looked at my image in the rearview mirror. Before I could even ring the bell, Mom answered, her face unreadable. Without waiting for my answer, she turned abruptly and stated, "We're in the living room." It felt like a rehearsed scene inside. Dad appeared uneasy and a little gray as he sat in his go-to armchair. With her fingers twitching in her lap and her eyes down, Rebecca sat on the edge of the couch. In what appeared to be a protective position, Mom stood behind Rebecca with one hand on the back of the sofa, and there, sitting where I had always been during family conversations, was Mean, who appeared both arrogant and worried. "What's happening?" I asked, still upright, as nobody sat down to take my place. "I assumed we would discuss the wedding, Rebecca. We're all here for that reason." Before Rebecca could finish her sentence, Mom interrupted. "You must comprehend a certain aspect of the wedding." A peculiar silence descended upon me. There seemed to be a lull before a storm. "We've been talking about things," Mom went on, adopting the loving tone she had honed over many years of raising a family. "And we all agreed that your involvement in the wedding has become problematic." Problematic? I repeated, staring straight at Rebecca, who continued to avoid eye contact. Mom said, crossing things off her finger like things on a grocery list, "Your domineering behavior, your need to make everything about yourself, the way you've tried to overshadow Rebecca's special time with your opinions and your financial contributions." I had the impression that I had entered a different reality. I urged, "Rebecca," hoping my sister would speak for herself. When she looked up at last, her face was a mix of practiced resolution and guilt. "Lisa, it's simply been so stressful. Tension arises each time you become engaged." "Mom thinks," I repeated quietly. "What are your thoughts, Rebecca?" Mom moved forward and partially separated us before she could respond. "According to Rebecca, her wedding ought to be a joyous affair. To be honest, your presence would prevent that." As she spoke, the room appeared to slant a little. "You mean I was at the planning?" Mom's eyes gleamed with delight at finally landing the blow she had been planning for months, and her lips curled into what can only be described as a grin. "We all concurred," she said. "You're not welcome at the wedding," pronouncing each syllable as if she were enjoying a good glass of wine. "Not as a bridesmaid, not as a guest, and not as maid of honor. This is best for everyone." There was complete stillness after that. In a seemingly lengthy moment, I could hear the old clock on the mantel ticking away the seconds. Dad moved in his seat but remained silent. My sister, Rebecca, who has been my best friend since the beginning of time, sat in complicit silence while Megan had the grace to glance at the floor, thereby ending our 30 years of sisterhood. Finally, shocked by the consistency of my own voice, I answered, "I see. When did this choice get made?" Mom answered, "We've been going in this direction for months." Mistaking shock for acceptance, they were obviously happy with my composed response. "A few weeks ago, Rebecca asked Megan to be her maid of honor. We just needed to make it official." I turned to face Megan, who gave me a defiant look in return. with a flat congratulations, I said. It's nothing personal, she said, her deception obvious. I nearly chuckled at the absurdity. There is nothing personal about taking my place at my sister's wedding or in her life. Rebecca. I gave it another go. Do you truly want this? Mom responded once more. Rebecca desires a wedding free of turmoil. You've always been overly opinionated and domineering. You must have your way in everything. The location wasn't suitable. The caterer did not meet your expectations. That's untrue, and you are aware of it. I cut in, sensing the first rift in my calm exterior, even in cases where I wasn't consulted. I have backed every choice. I have made thousands of dollars in honest contributions. See, there it is, Mom pointed scornfully, using your financial contributions to control the wedding and throwing your money in our faces. That's precisely why you're unable to attend. I quietly begged my father to say something, anything at all, as I gazed at him. He glanced away after briefly meeting my eyes, continuing his long-time habit of avoiding confrontation. A peculiar serenity still hung over me. Then, a clarity pierced the chaos and pain. There was no miscommunication here. There was no way that a heart-to-heart could resolve this. This omission was meticulously planned, months in the making. Good to know, was all I said. I turned and moved robotically in the direction of the door. Rebecca spoke my name gently once behind me, but there were no footsteps. Nobody made an attempt to stop me. The trip home went by quickly. Unexpected tears entered my eyes, causing the street lights to smear like watercolors. On 2 occasions, I stopped when the road became too hazy to drive safely. I couldn't force myself to look at the incoming texts that were buzzing on my phone. Tyler was waiting for me when I arrived at my flat, his face bursting with optimistic expectation as soon as he saw me. He asked, "What happened?" and seized me in an embrace right away. Between sobbing, the entire story spilled out in fragmented pieces. The ambush, Rebecca's treachery, Dad's silence, Mom's sly smile, and Megan's victory. Tyler said, "They can't do this." Once I was done, his voice was filled with outrage. "You're her sister. All you've done is encourage her." As emotional tiredness started to set in, I murmured, "Apparently, that doesn't matter. For months, Mom has been trying to turn Rebecca against me and paint me as a monster of some sort." "What are you going to do?" With his hand warm against mine, Tyler inquired. I felt hollow but also lighter as I gazed out the window at the city lights below, as though the worst had just occurred. I could then start rebuilding. I acknowledge that I don't know yet, but I know I'm worthy of better. Everything. I was unaware at the time that the altercation that night was not the end of the tale. It was only a prelude to what would happen next. The depths of treachery as well as the surprising route to recovery that would emerge in the days that followed. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat up reliving the event at my parents' house, dissecting every word and glanced to see if there was anything I might have misconstrued. However, the recollection of my mother's contented smile upon giving birth, there was no room for doubt in her decision. I had completely given up on sleep. By 4 a.m. I started listing all the things I had done to help plan Rebecca's wedding while I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea becoming cold next to me. 2,500 is the photographer's deposit. $1,800. Custom welcome basket for visitors from out of town. I had arranged for a $1,200 string quartet as a surprise for the ceremony. As I remembered minor expenses, the list got longer. After Rebecca emphasized how much she loved hand lettering, I hired a calligrapher to create place cards, and I discovered a vintage hairpin that matched Rebecca's grandmother's earrings. Then came the diamond in the crown of my presents to James and my sister, the honeymoon. Bali first-class tickets cost $4,200. $3,800 for the private villa with views of the ocean. A total of $600 was spent on the unique experiences I had planned, including a private cooking lesson, a sunset cruise, and a guided hike to secret waterfalls. I had given more than $15,000 to a wedding that I was now not allowed to attend. I made my choice just as the first rays of dawn were appearing. I went to my banking app after opening my laptop. Slowly but surely, I returned the $8,600 honeymoon fund to my personal account. I then carefully canceled each reservation by logging into the websites of the airline and the resort. I informed the travel agent in charge of the special experiences, in a succinct, business-like email, that the arrangements had shifted. Throughout the night, my phone had been vibrating sporadically with incoming calls and texts, but I had chosen not to check it. I looked at the notifications now. Rebecca missed 3 calls, Mom missed 12 and Dad missed 1, which was out of the ordinary. The majority of the texts were from Mom, and they ranged from accusatory ones like "after everything we've done for you" to defensive ones like "you're making this all about you again." None of them showed regret or rethinking. I called my credit card company one last time. I told the representative, I need to report some unauthorized charges. Without my consent, family members have been making transactions. Although it wasn't totally true, it wasn't totally false either. I had never specifically given my mother permission to use my credit card details to pay for the extra wedding favors and better linens she had insisted on ordering last month. I had carefully entangled my financial ties to Rebecca's wedding by 7 in the morning. I briefly informed my supervisor via email that I needed a personal day before shutting off my phone entirely. The abrupt quiet was both freeing and disturbing. In an attempt to comprehend the enormity of what had transpired, I spent the morning strolling through the public gardens. There was a real pain beneath my ribs from the betrayal, and it got worse with every breath. For 30 years, Rebecca and I had shared everything. Dreams, secrets, grief, and festivities. How could she remain mute as my mother threw me out of her wedding? How could she use Megan of all people to take my place? I had lunch with my best friend Olivia at around noon. I had no intention of telling her everything, but she could tell something was seriously wrong just by looking at my face. What did they do? When I finished explaining, she yelled so loudly that people at nearby tables turned to stare. That was said directly to your face by your own mother? I pushed salad around my plate without eating while nodding. Rebecca remained silent as she sat there. Following hours of self-doubt, Olivia's wrath was validated. I trailed off, the pain still too deep to properly express, because she tried to talk once or twice but Mom kept cutting her off and didn't stop any of it. On the other side of the table, Olivia reached for my hand. Lisa, you should be aware of this. I didn't want to upset you, so I didn't tell you before, but now I feel like you should know. My stomach became constricted. What is it? For months, your mother has been making comments about you. Olivia appeared uneasy. She informed my mother that you were envious of Rebecca's pleasure during her engagement celebration. She also noted how everyone was worried about your delicate emotional state and how the family was being cautious around you during the Williams dinner party last month. I was shocked as I looked at her. What? Why would she say that? I'm not sure, but she has been sowing these tiny seeds with all of your acquaintances. Small remarks and worried expressions. Just enough to give the idea that you're unstable in some way, but not enough to come across as nasty, challenging. Olivia gave me a hand squeeze. I'm not everywhere, but whenever I hear it, I shut it down. I could still hear my mom's voice. You need to make everything about yourself and your domineering actions. She had done more than simply turn Rebecca against me. She had been the daughter you wanted to think the best of your mother. Olivia made a kind correction. Blindness is not what that is. That's affection. I felt different by the time I got home that afternoon. I was still hurt, but I understood what was going on and what I had to do. I reactivated my phone and observed the inundation of notifications. There were a total of 28 missed calls, voicemails from my father's awkward attempts at conciliation to my mother's icy rage, as well as one from Rebecca at 3:42 a.m. that completely turned everything upside down. Lisa, I'm very sorry. For months, Mom has been lying to me about you. James and I recently learned about her actions with the honeymoon reservations. Give me a call, please. My sister must return. I spend a lot of time looking at Rebecca's message while keeping my thumb over the phone button without really hitting it. Her text's unfiltered emotion seemed sincere. However, following months of deception and the violent altercation yesterday, I wasn't prepared to return to the pandemonium without further knowledge. The other texts depicted the breakdown of a family. From righteously outraged, Mom's voicemails changed with time. How dare you call off the honeymoon after threatening to give it as a gift? Due to your unpersuasive attempt at reconciliation, I am forced to notify everyone about your actions. If you apologize, we can still make this right. Dad sent out fewer and more muted messages, with a background noise that suggested he was calling from his automobile to avoid being overheard. He stated, "Your mother is very upset." All of this was unknown to me until yesterday. When you can, please give us a call. Other relatives have also started to contribute. My uncle Robert, who has always supported my mother, gave a harsh lesson on how to treat parents with respect. In her faltering voice, my grandmother inquired as to how I was feeling, evidently having heard Mom's side of the story, but there were also unanticipated backers. Despite her tendency to stay out of family conflict, Aunt Catherine left a rather strong message. Lisa, I've seen your mum do this before. With your father, she treated me in the same way. Give me a call. We must speak. I made the decision to start there by first phoning my father's sister, Lisa. Oh. The line was instantly filled with Aunt Catherine's kind voice. I've been really anxious. Are you okay? Not really, I said. Aunt Kath, I have no idea what's going on. Why would Mom act in this way? Simply put, because you threaten her. Since you were young, you always have. So strong, so self-sufficient. Deborah must be in charge of everything. She reacts when that is contested. She achieves this by turning my sister against me and preventing me from attending the wedding. Catherine let out a sigh. When I was your age, she treated me in the same way. I always had a close relationship with your father. But everything changed after he met Deborah. She made up disputes that didn't exist. I told your father that I had said horrible remarks about her. I wasn't invited to their wedding either. I sat down and gave this epiphany a lot of thought. I never heard that from Dad. Thomas has consistently favored harmony over conflict, particularly when it comes to your mother. Only years later, and never like before, did we finally get back together, she said softly. However, this isn't about the past. This is about breaking the pattern right away, before it irreparably harms your connection with Rebecca. After talking to Catherine, I gave my college best friend Andrea, a therapist, a call. She assisted me in comprehending the dynamics at work without violating confidentially. Triangulation, narcissistic tendencies, and the golden child scapegoat dynamic have all influenced my connection with Rebecca since I was a young child. Andrea underlined that the most crucial thing is to uphold your personal limits while allowing Rebecca to return. She has also been tricked. Recall that when my phone called again, I was still pondering this counsel. Rebecca's fiancé, James. He sounded very distressed. Lisa, I'm glad you responded. Here, there has been anarchy. For hours, Rebecca has been in tears. James, what happened? I didn't want to be trusted, so I spoke in an impartial tone. We learnt about your mother's activities. Thea has been saying, Lisa, Rebecca was unaware that you were not allowed to shop for dresses. Your mother informed her that you were unable to attend, showed her your canceling texts. What? I never texted anyone. Now we are aware of that. It appears that your mother staged discussions to show Rebecca, giving the impression that you were too busy or uninterested in the wedding festivities. His tone became stern. She acknowledged altering the names in Rebecca's phone's contact list and forwarding some of your communications to her own phone. When we confronted her, the degree of intentional manipulation was astounding. However, Rebecca believed that the purpose of the meeting yesterday at the house was to make amends. Your mother informed her that you needed to hear how hurt everyone was because you had been talking terrible things about the wedding. She had no idea what had truly transpired. My mind was racing. Why is she using you to tell me this? Because she fears you won't talk to her ever again. And since, he hesitated, last night, after you left, your mother arrived to our flat. She was ill, yelling about unappreciative kids and insisting that we take sides. Neighbors phoned building security because it had gotten that awful. More quickly than I could comprehend, the situation was becoming out of control. James, I must ponder. All of this is excessive. I get it. Don't close the door entirely though. All right, you are loved by Rebecca. She has also been tricked. I claimed I will be in contact shortly, but I made no promises. Before I could fully comprehend this talk, my work phone rang. Sandra, our office receptionist, was there. I'm sorry to interrupt you on your day off, Lisa, but there's a problem. About 20 minutes ago, your mother came and insisted on seeing you. She was making quite a commotion in the foyer when I told her that you weren't in. I was experiencing the worst kind of collision between my personal and professional lives. What precisely is she doing? Accusing her, claiming to be having a breakdown, and telling anybody who will listen that you have taken money from her. Sandra spoke more quietly. She is getting more and more unpredictable, despite Mr. Daniel's best efforts to manage it. I grabbed my keys and said, I'll be right there. It felt like I had entered a combat zone throughout the 15-minute journey to my office. Mom had never come to work with me. had previously expressed little interest in my work outside of its financial benefits to the family. She was now there and purposefully aimed at the career reputation I had worked so hard to establish. When I got there, I heard my mother's voice echoing through the lobby as security escorted her out of the building. "You're not aware of her full potential. She has been troubled all her life." My face was burning with humiliation as my co-workers saw the spectacle. My immediate supervisor, Mr. Daniels, came over with anxiety. "Lisa, take whatever time you need to handle this personal matter," he whispered quietly. "Your work is self-evident. Nobody in this room is listening to baseless charges." Although I should have been reassured by his support, the public display made me feel vulnerable and violated. This was more than just a wedding. Mom made a concerted effort to undermine the cornerstones of my life, profession, relationships, and reputation. My mother's gaze met mine across the lobby as security led her to the parking lot. I saw frigid rage and worse, joy at upsetting my meticulously organized environment, rather than the regret or shame one might anticipate. Something changed inside of me at that very instant. A mature adult who was finally able to recognize the pattern of manipulation for what it was, took the place of the wounded child who was looking for her mother's approval. It wasn't love. It wasn't family. This was mistreatment, and it had continued for too long. I went back to my flat and decided what to do. It was time to deal with this issue once and for all, using cool, unquestionable facts rather than emotional responses, to lay out exactly what had transpired and set boundaries that would safeguard my well-being moving forward. I would meet with Rebecca and any other parties involved. For the first time, I realized that I deserved better treatment than I had been given, and I was ready to demand it, regardless of whether those boundaries included going to the wedding or even keeping in touch with my mother. 2 days later, I was seated at a corner table at a calm cafe that was midway between Rebecca's and my apartment. To calm myself, I had arrived early and placed the proof in a folder next to me. Screenshots of the original texts that ran counter to the ones Mom had made up. Confirmations by email of the wedding plans I had made. Statements from my bank that reflect my contributions. Rebecca showed up by herself, appearing somehow smaller. She lost the confidence she usually possessed. Her eyes had the same dark bags under them that mine did. She slipped into the chair across from me and whispered softly, "Thank you for coming." I asked James, expecting him after our phone chat, if he would be joining us. "He is parking his vehicle. I wanted to spend some time with you alone initially." She placed her purse next to her with a little trembling in her hands. "I'm not really sure where to start, Lisa." I waited, allowing her time to speak. This was not what I had anticipated. After the confrontation, we had our first talk, but nothing about this circumstance had gone as planned. Rebecca's voice broke as she finally said, I believed her. "Mom has been sending me texts from you for months now, stating that you were too preoccupied with your significant career to care about the specifics of my wedding and that you thought my wedding selections were tacky." Her cheeks were wet with tears. It was simpler for me to believe her than to believe my mother would intentionally and utterly lie. I asked, still not quite understanding the full scope of the fraud. "She showed you fake texts?" Rebecca took out her phone and nodded. "James worked it out. Take a look at this." She opened her messaging app and scrolled to the messages we had exchanged. However, those weren't my exact words. Messages criticizing her decisions, complaining about expenses, and dismissing wedding arrangements. Written with a voice that is completely different from mine, yet all credited to my number. My phone was in Mom's possession. She made a contact using your name and her number. I was texting her while I mistakenly believed I was texting you. She would then reply by posing as you. Rebecca rubbed her eyes and erased your actual messages. Half of the stuff you sent me were never delivered. The deception's meticulousness was astounding. However, what about the time we actually met? You could tell something wasn't right, surely. Over the previous few months, we had hardly seen one another. Every time you were unable to attend a wedding, Mom had an excuse. Additionally, she was constantly in charge of the conversation when we did meet, interpreting everything you said in the worst possible light afterwards. James walked over to the table, and Rebecca looked up. Everything was poisoned by her. After having 3 coffees, James sat down next to Rebecca. "I'm really sorry, Lisa. I ought to have noticed what was going on earlier." "How did you solve it?" I inquired. James clarified that the turning point was the canceling of the honeymoon. Rebecca was perplexed upon receiving the notification, as she was unaware of the Bali vacation. Your mother said that after being rightfully left out of the wedding, you canceled the lavish honeymoon that you had promised. But that didn't make sense, Rebecca said. Why would you spend thousands on a honeymoon for us if you were as resentful as Mom claimed? Thus, we began our investigation. By looking through her phone logs and comparing message timestamps, James added, the entire fiction collapsed as we began searching for discrepancies. We discovered a folder on your mother's tablet which served as the last piece of evidence. In fact, she had been preserving screenshots of fictitious exchanges she made, most likely to support her claims. My folder was pushed across the table. I presented my own proof, original emails, bank transfers, and anything else. Rebecca and James' faces changed from astonishment to terror to disgust as they went over the documents. Outrage. There could not have been a more dramatic difference between my mother's portrayal and my actual words and deeds, James remarked. That day at your parents' house, Rebecca believed that the purpose of our discussion was to address misunderstandings. She was unaware that your mother intended to forbid you from attending the wedding. With a tone of humiliation in her voice, Rebecca said, I froze, Mom said. We all agreed when she started uttering those awful things. I was stunned. You had already left when I finally processed what was occurring. She reached across the table for my hand. I never consented to keep you out of my wedding, Lisa. Never. You are my best friend and sister. Without you present, I am unable to get married. I didn't anticipate the emotional outburst that came with my experience being validated. I had been gaslighted for months into doubting my own views and value within my family. As soon as I felt comfortable speaking up again, I remarked, we need to talk about Mom. This is not typical conduct. This manipulation is intentional and well thought out. It becomes worse, James remarked somberly. Rebecca said, after you left that night, to your mother. The things she said, the venom, it was like watching someone transform into a different person. Rebecca gave a nod. She acknowledged all of it, but she showed no regret. She claimed to be shielding me from your harmful influence. She threatened to stop providing any financial support and to inform everyone in the family that I was having a pre-wedding breakdown. When I expressed my desire for you to return to the wedding, I muttered, just like what she's been saying about me. That's right, James attested. She employs this strategy to disparage anyone who opposes her. The following hour was devoted to outlining the complete scope of my mother's manipulation, the financial control, the redirected invitations, the changed texts, and the rumors that circulated within our social circle. A thorough picture of deliberate, emotional abuse spanning decades was painted as each revelation built upon the one before it. I've set up a meeting with Dad, Aunt Catherine, and some other family members who need to hear the truth, I eventually stated. A kind of impartial family intervention. When? Rebecca inquired. Tomorrow night. Are you coming? Without hesitation, she gave a nod. Obviously, everyone needs to know the truth. The next evening's family gathering was both required and challenging. Along with Dad, Aunt Catherine, Uncle Paul, Rebecca, James, and our maternal grandmother Martha, who had particularly requested to be included after getting alarming calls from Mom, we all met in Aunt Catherine's living room. I meticulously and emotionally presented the evidence. The witness reports of Mom's public actions, the financial records, and the phony texts. Catherine related comparable experiences from previous decades. James talked about their flat where Mom had a breakdown. Dad remained silent for the majority of the presentation, his face turning grayer as the evidence grew. His voice was hardly audible when he eventually spoke. He acknowledged that he knew some of it, not to the degree, but enough that I ought to have taken action long ago. His eyes were filled with regret as he gazed at me. I didn't want to protect you. I wanted tranquilly. Lisa, I'm very sorry. After being informed that this was a wedding budget talk, Mom arrived last. When she noticed the gathered company and the evidence strewn all over the coffee table, her assured entrance wavered. With her gaze flitting between faces, she questioned, what is this? Simply put, a chance for truth, I said. What transpired was terrible and inevitable. Denial at first, charges of plotting against her, and tries to acquire allies using tried and true deception techniques. When those failed, there came anger, cold and cutting, followed by heated and uncontrollable, and ultimately, when confronted with indisputable proof, tears and accusations of miscommunication and a desire to look out for the family's best interests. When nobody was affected by her performance, she declared, "I will not be treated this way," Rebecca said, turning to face our mother straight. "After I had done everything I could for this family for the wedding, as I've always desired, Lisa will be my maid of honor. You will have a very limited role at the wedding and in our future lives if you are unable to accept it and treat her with respect." Mom's face twisted in disbelief. "She is the one you would pick above your own mother." "I'm going with the truth instead of manipulation," Rebecca said calmly. "Health is more important to me than toxicity. This will never be permitted by your father." Mom looked at Dad. Her expression was one of expectation. Perhaps for the first time in their marriage, Dad refused to compromise in order to maintain harmony. "Enough, Deborah. Take a look at your actions. Examine the proof. This is over." There was no tidy conclusion to the intervention. Mom departed in a rage, vowing to hold us accountable for our treachery. However, a fundamental change had occurred. The people it was intended to control have identified, revealed, and rejected the pattern of manipulation. We were far from the finish line in terms of challenging family members and wedding dynamics. Regardless of what it could entail for the wedding, which is only a few weeks away, I felt for the first time that we were all moving in the same direction, that is, towards truth and stronger relationships. Our broken family was beginning to settle into a tentative new normal the week before Rebecca's wedding. Mom had tried a number of different strategies following the intervention: cold silence, sobs for forgiveness, angry accusations, and ultimately a reluctant public acknowledgement of the new limits we had set. We were all taken aback by Dad's unwavering support for Rebecca's choice to restore me as maid of honor. He appeared to have discovered a source of strength that none of us were aware he possessed. After decades of prioritizing peace above conflict, he told me in private, on the balcony of my flat, "I should have protected you both long ago. Below us, city lights are twinkling." I persuaded myself that maintaining the peace was equivalent to saying nothing. I was wrong. "Why now, Dad?" I asked softly. "What changed?" He gazed at his coffee cup for a considerable amount of time, observing how everything is organized and how purposeful everything is. I was no longer able to avoid it. "To be honest, Lisa, I'm exhausted. I'm fed up with being cautious and acting as though nothing is wrong." His openness was both startling and consoling. I had optimism that true change would be achievable because of this new version of my father who was prepared to own up to difficult realities, apologize, and change. Day by day, Rebecca and I had been mending our relationship. It was bruised, but not shattered. We had grieved the months of sisterhood we had lost while spending many hours discussing the manipulations that had caused us to split ways. She returned to their proper position in our weekly routines when she commented, "I keep thinking about what would have happened if James hadn't discovered those fake texts." During one of our reconciliation brunches, I squeezed her hand across the table and said, "Let's not think about that. We have arrived." Regarding Mom, the family had laid out certain terms for her. Although she could attend the wedding, her participation would be severely limited. No more making decisions all by yourself, speaking privately with suppliers, or attempting to control or isolate any family members. With a tone full of contempt, she had queried, "And if I refuse these conditions?" Rebecca had firmly said, "Then you'll attend as a guest only with no input on any elements of the ceremony or reception." Mom had finally agreed, much to everyone's astonishment, but her cooperation appeared more calculated than sincere. The real tale was revealed by the fleeting glints of hatred in her eyes that were soon covered up by fake pleasantness. In unanticipated ways, going through this experience had changed me personally. After too long of normalizing family relations, the original destruction had given way to clarity. I had started to identify enabling and people-leasing patterns in my own behavior that had left me open to manipulation while working with a therapist who specialized in familial trauma. What you provide to other people does not determine your value. I was reminded by Dr. Marshall during a particularly challenging session, not practically, emotionally, or financially. As the last stages of wedding planning approached, these phrases become a catchphrase. With a renewed awareness of limits, I returned to my position as maid of honor. Yes, I would help Rebecca with last-minute things and help organize the bridesmaids. No, I wouldn't spend all of my money or jeopardize my health in order to control the feelings of others. Additionally, I had prepared a slightly altered honeymoon package for Rebecca and James that was still lavish but scaled, to take into account my newfound knowledge of giving in a healthy way. When I presented the updated itinerary, I informed them that this was a gift that was freely offered and came with no conditions. Not a reward for love or acceptance. In stunning contrast to the emotional storms of the preceding months, the wedding day itself arrived bright and clear. The Clayton Hotel was to host the event at 4:00 p.m., giving the morning and early afternoon for preparations. Despite the obvious strain of the endeavor, Mom continued to behave as she had promised. She barely spoke to me, but she was pleasant on the outside. She concentrated on portraying the bride's mother to the attendees in the gathering in the ideal way. I briefly had a sense of loss for the simple joy this day ought to have brought as I assisted Rebecca into her wedding gown, the one I hadn't been there to witness her select. Rebecca noticed my face in the mirror. She whispered, "I wish we could erase the last few months." "I don't," I said, startling myself. Even while it was terrible, it exposed the truth. "We can now construct a healthy structure." Shining in ivory lace, she turned to look at me. "My older sister became so clever when," I said, gently arranging my little sister's veil, maybe around the time she became so courageous. The ceremony went quite well. I proudly stood next to Rebecca, clutching her bouquet while she and James uttered heartfelt vows. Mom and Dad sat side by side in the first row, with immaculate poise and occasionally unreadable emotion in their eyes as they met mine. The most surprising healing moment happened during the reception. I was briefly alone myself near the gift table, rearranging some misplaced cards while the guests mixed during cocktail hour. "It's lovely calligraphy." From behind me came Mom's voice. "You did that, didn't you?" I turned, expecting a compliment disguised as criticism, but there was something in her face that I rarely saw coming at me. "Sincere gratitude." "Yes," I replied, plainly. Mom nodded when Rebecca emphasized how much she loved hand altering, and an awkward quiet stretched between us. At last, she spoke once more, but this time in a softer, less confident tone. "You've always observed the little things about people, like their interests and priorities. That gift was never mine." She made a tiny but profound admission that immediately stopped me in my tracks. Mom continued, looking anywhere but at me. "Says I need to practice acknowledging others' strengths without feeling diminished by them," said Catherine, the therapist. A quick laugh without humor. "It seems like I have some work to do there." "Do you have a therapist?" I couldn't contain my amazement when I spoke. "After everything your father insisted." She squared her shoulders after trailing off. "I don't think this will make our relationship better." "I'm trying, but I realize it will take time, if it can be done at all." There was no apology. It was a small break in the wall of denial she had erected around herself, but it wasn't a change. And that was sufficient for today. Our family started exploratory group therapy sessions a month after the wedding. Mom initially attended grudgingly but eventually became more receptive as the framework provided her with legitimate, non-manipulative means of expressing her wants. Gradually, Dad's voice began to reveal long-suppressed truths. Rebecca and I grew closer. Our sisterhood is now based on respect for one another instead of codependency. My personal healing process also proceeded on its own. I set more defined limits in all of my interactions, not just with my family. I developed the ability to spot when my assistance was going too far. Most significantly, I started to appreciate myself independently of what I could offer or do for other people. Tyler had been my pillar of support over the whole affair. He never wavered in his unwavering support. During a weekend walk 6 months after Rebecca's wedding, he proposed, saying, "To our favorite mountain overlook." I answered without hesitation, "Yes, but with a caveat." He waited, raising an eyebrow. "We keep our wedding preparations private. There is no drama, a small committee, and defined boundaries." His chuckles reverberated over the valley under us. Deal. In the years that followed, life kept changing. Mom's development happened in spurts. Some days exhibit real progress, while others revert to previous trends. Dad found a renewed sense of self-assurance that rekindled his long-suppressed hobbies as well as his marriage. With the arrival of Rebecca and James' first child, I became an aunt to a young girl whose middle name, Lisa, made me cry. And maybe most importantly, I discovered that forgetting is not necessary for forgiveness. That boundaries serve as the basis for the healthiest manifestation of love rather than acting as obstacles to it. And that maintaining your self-worth is crucial rather than selfish. The trip since that terrible evening when my mother uttered those harsh comments. We all agreed that it wasn't straightforward or simple to get to where I am now. You're not invited to the wedding. It took guts to confront unpleasant realities, discernment to identify wholesome relationships from unhealthy ones, and fortitude to demand the respect I was due. Remember that sometimes the most difficult limits to set are the ones that finally result in healing. If you're dealing with comparable family issues or unpleasant exclusions, the ability of others to see your value is not what determines it. And sometimes, even when it appears like there is no chance for reconciliation, it's actually the first step towards a healthier one. What you think of this story would be greatly appreciated. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with loved ones or resist manipulation by family members? When others failed to recognize your value, how did you find the confidence to value yourself? If you found this tale to be meaningful, please leave a comment below and remember to like, subscribe, and share. As we work together to negotiate these challenging human experiences, your support is crucial. I appreciate you listening. And keep in mind that your story is important too.